Doris, you darling bus, episode number 5. G'day ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Doris, You Darling Bus, a fortnightly podcast about the unsung hero of the music industry, the tour bus. I'm your host, my name is Jono Zilber, and today's guest is a songwriter, a producer, and the lead singer of popular Aussie post-hardcore band Hands Like Houses, who've been very busy since the release of their 4th studio album, Anon. So I'm lucky to have tied him down in one spot for half an hour, and he joins me from his home studio just outside Newcastle in New South Wales. Trenton Woodley, thank you so much for taking the time.
You got me. Nailed me down.
Mate, just reading this morning the Hands Like Houses bio. 15 US tours, 9 UK tours, 3 sold-out Australian tours, and I suspect you've just added a 4th.
Can I have a feeling that's going to be out of date. I know it's more than that. I don't know how many it is, but yeah, it's...
Well, this is taken from the press release before your latest album, so I suspect it's going to be more than that. But even enough. Still...
Maybe it is that many. Still, it's been a lot. I was going through my laminate pile the other day. I was just like, man, there's a lot.
Yeah, and all in the space of 7 years.
Yeah.
Which is the incredible thing. So you've been very busy boys, but in that time, I'm sure you've done a million interviews, but I, of course, have an unfair advantage over everyone else in that you and I go all the way back to high school.
Yeah.
And that's where I want to start.
All right.
So before Hands Like Houses, in around 2005, 2006, or as I like to refer to the year as year 11, 12, there was Eternal Debut.
Ooh, yep.
Which was your first band, and there's not a lot of history about Eternal Debut on the internet. It sort of disappeared with MySpace.
I did well,
but you've done pretty well at hiding all of that. But I've got a few memories up in my noggin.
I'm sure you do.
And I want to talk about, because that was your first band, and even back in those days, you were huge on the DIY sort of thing and putting a lot of work into making things professional and making the band as big as you could possibly make it.
Yep, definitely a tough ask being a high school band from Canberra, but we did okay for what we were doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing, is that obviously from those early days, being a big touring band was something that you wanted. Is it something that you've always kind of dreamed of?
It's funny because we get asked a lot, and I think for me it was never really like that's my goal. I think like obviously when you're in a high school band, you've always got stars in your eyes of like what could be possible. But I think I guess that being in that band kind of taught me a lot about just expectations, and kind of I think we went in just with the sky's the limit sort of mentality. But it wasn't like that's everything we want. It was more just like, hey, let's do something meaningful now and see where it takes us. And I think that was the mentality I took into Hands Like Houses when the guys asked me to join. Then being called So Long Safety, that band. Mm-hmm. No, our band itself has been through like a bunch of changes over the years of members, styles, and obviously took a while to kind of settle on the lineup that we eventually had, and I was the last one to join in that regard. But yeah, it just kind of it was always. I mean, we were broke. We were just working regular jobs at home, and there wasn't really the resources back then that there was now in terms of like computer recording and stuff. So we still managed to record ourselves with more or less a borrowed rig and set up in a friend's little kind of granny flat out the back of someone's house that he was staying at, and just kind of I guess learnt by doing, and I think that put me in a pretty good spot to kind of take that experience forward. And as we started doing the hand stuff, I think it was like 4 years later, in end of 2008, early 2009 was when we kind of really started doing stuff when I joined. Just kind of learned a lot from that experience, and not so much about touring, but definitely kind of, like you said, the DIY ethos of, at least if do it yourself until, you have the option of having someone do it for you and do it better.
Yeah. You started touring in about 2012. You'd already been a band for a few years by then. Mm-hmm. That was your first US tour. Had you been touring around Australia in the meantime?
I wouldn't say touring. Like, obviously when you're starting out, you like, holy crap, we're going to Sydney for the weekend. It's a tour. But, we definitely played a few shows in kind of, Sydney. I think we did something in Adelaide, 1 or 2 in Melbourne back then. And it was mostly just kind of learning to play songs in a live environment, more so than touring. Touring really was, that I guess our first real tour was in 2011, I think it was, maybe 2010. We did a little Australian run with some friends. And then our first real tour was actually across mainland Europe in 2011. And, that was very much an eye-opening experience because we, went out in like this Sprinter splitter van across UK and Europe. Actually, maybe... No, yeah. It was like with this Italian band and a UK band called the Elijah. The Italian band was called Hope Die Last. And I wasn't in the best of headspaces at that time just for personal life reasons. But kind of that tour was, I guess, the first real kind of, out on the road tour. Because we, like I said, we'd done a few links of shows. We'd just before that run, we'd done a little run with Dream on Dreamer and the Bride. Through like Australian capital cities, but even then Australia is like, when you link together 5 or 6 shows, it's still barely a tour in the grand scale of things. So that kind of, I guess, taught us what it is to be on the road rather than just kind of playing, shows in different cities over a couple of weekends.
A bit of experience to like, okay, so this is what it's going to be like stuck in a van with other people for days on end.
Yeah, pretty much.
And it was, was that a good grounding for the Europe tour where you were sort of moving on to a new town every night and doing longer stretches?
Yep. And being cooped up in a vehicle, like I said, it was a splitter van. That's all we could kind of really afford at the time. It was owned by a friend. It was called the Custard.
Right.
So our, I guess, tour manager / driver, a guy named Danny, legend, still keep up with him. And he had this Mercedes Sprinter that it's quite a common configuration for over in UK and Europe. You have, what is it, 2 seats at the front, kind of 6 seats in the back. Either all facing forward or facing each other with a little pokey little coffee table in the middle. Well, not really a coffee table, like a lap table thing. I don't know. It was always awkward, kind of squeezing in and out because you kind of got to sit down and then just kind of wriggle over to the window side. And then there's usually like just a bunk up the back that, in theory, allows someone to sleep, but realistically usually ends up just being where you could put all your bags while you're driving. And then in the back, that there's like underneath that bunk, there's a bit of space as well as just like, Sprinter size. So like, I guess like 1.8, 2 meters of height and then about, 1.5 meters wide, 1.5 meters deep. So it's a lot of space not a lot of space for a lot of gear, especially once you start packing merch and stuff in there as well. So very tight quarters, and we were staying in kind of, we stayed at people's places, and we had some pretty shocking places we stayed just because, people offered them, but, just some dirty flats in the UK, and then some kind of janky hostels in Europe, and very occasionally we'd get like a Travelodge or, kind of like basically an Ibis budget type room.
Right.
And just one room between 6 of the band plus, our tour manager plus our driver tech. So, it got very pokey very fast.
Yeah, right. Still very much that DIY kind of vibe, but next level.
Whoa! I just realised I completely mixed that up. No, that wasn't the Custard.
Huh?
Was it? Oh, man. I'm getting mixed up now because it was Razor that was with us. I think Danny was the next tour.
Okay. Well, see, that's the thing is I'm looking...
It might have still been yeah, exactly. We were saying how many tours it was. They all blur together a bit, and I'm just trying to remember which one was which now.
Exactly. When I was doing my research before this interview, I was looking at all of the tours and all of the bands that you've toured with, either supporting you or you supporting them. It's a hell of a list.
Yeah.
Have you found that they sort of help you out, like when you do support tours, and are they pretty open to like, this is what you can expect on the tour, and as newbies coming along? Is there a bit of that mentorship kind of thing?
Yes and no. We were lucky that it isn't necessarily a typical thing. It certainly wasn't when we started out. But I guess our first couple of tours, we learned a lot because we had to. I would say it's kind of. That particular tour, we didn't really have explicit help from the other touring bands, but the guy that was booking it all, Graham, he kind of connected us up with Razor, the driver, and then the van, wherever we got the van from on that particular tour. I think it was just a borrowed van from somewhere else. Razor ended up getting his own, which we took out on a later tour. But I think it was kind of in 2012, we did a couple of tours in the US. We did one called the Rise Records Freshman Tour, which I think we're just doing we bought this thing called Thor, we called it Thor. It was our it was like I don't know if you've ever been to LA, but they have these shuttle buses that do the runs back and forth from like the various hotels around the area and like the long stay parking lots and the car hire places. And they're these kind of the American school buses. It's just basically like a very short bastardized version of one of those. And so we had that fitted out with Costco shelving.
Okay.
These like heavy duty kitchen shelves that are about 6 foot long by about 2.5 feet wide, maybe 3. No, it was probably about 3 feet wide, and we just got like camping mattresses and a bit of plywood underneath, so very uncomfortable. And thank God we never crashed it because we would have all been skewered. It was definitely not the safest of touring vehicles.
Sure,
but it's America, safety standards. What?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, we kind of picked up on those. Actually, no, I think the first tour we did do in a 15-seater, that freshman tour, and we bought Thor, I think, ahead of the next tour, which was the Scream It Like You Mean It tour, and that was partially influenced by the headlining band, the I Breathe, had one of those shuttle buses for that tour, and we thought, oh, that's great, there's so much more room than a 15-seater. So yeah, like that kind of, I guess it was kind of learning by seeing what other bands were doing. But as far as like learning how to tour and kind of that relationship with other bands and, working with crew and all that, I think it was the 2012 tour. What is it? It was a Pierce the Veil tour. They were headlining with Sleeping with Sirens as main support. I would argue maybe right at the, kind of the peak momentum of both those bands. So it was a really, really good tour for us in kind of establishing ourselves as like a, real touring band. But it was the first show of the tour. No, it was actually the second day of tour. We're in Arizona, and the tour manager for Pierce the Veil was just like, hey, absolutely non-negotiable. Every single band needs to be in the band room at this time. Just make sure that every single person is there. We've got some really important stuff we need to talk about. And everyone's just like, oh no, what have we done? Yeah. We're like literally like we've been on the tour for 24 hours, like what? And we turn up and the tour manager's really firm and just like, all right, is everyone here? All right, good. Vic, I'll hand over to you. And Vic, singer from Pierce the Veil, just came out and was like, well, welcome everybody. We've got you here because we love you guys as bands. We love you guys as people. We want you to have a great tour. So here's some Jameson and pizza and let's make a killer tour. And we're all like,
heck yes.
This is mad. So it was like, a really nice way to kick off the tour. And those guys, particularly with the way that they treat their crew, like, the crew are equals to the band. Especially at that time as well, there was a lot of this kind of, hierarchy mentality with a lot of touring bands at the time, and that was something that they'd always dealt with, and they just said, you know what, we don't want to be that band. We don't want to be the band that makes every band on the stage, stack their drum kits in front of each other so the openers are playing with like 1 foot in front of the drum kit, and their crew were legendary. Like they'd look after us and, accommodate us as best they could. And, there were some days where there was just, things that had to be worked around, but it made for just a really nice tour because everyone was chill, everyone was helpful, everyone was supportive, and kind of shaped the way that we wanted to tour as headliners. And I think that, ever since then, we've tried to be supportive of the openers, tried to see them as, just, musicians and equals at just a different point in their journey than we are, because that was us a few years ago. So, it is just about
paying it forward. Sort of that mentality that we got a bit of a leg up. So of course we're going to help other people. I think that's great. And also, speaking of crew, I'm reading that book Roadies at the moment by Stuart Coupe, collection of stories from roadies from like the golden era of Australian rock.
Sick.
They were all it was every band had a roadie and every roadie had a van, but they were like part of the band, and so it was kind of this symbiotic thing between the crews and the bands, which is really cool. Which
that's awesome.
Yeah, obviously doesn't always happen.
I think there's probably something to be said of the Australian quality in that. I think that Australians are more likely to look after each other. I feel like Americans often it's all like, oh, well, you need to pay your dues. So, and I already have paid mine, so I'm here and you're there, kind of thing. And that's not universal, of course. There are always really, really good people in any context. But yeah, I think that's something we kind of had to learn. That was a thing. Like, thankfully, we were lucky that with our touring cycle, we've only really had a couple of tours where the headliners had a little bit of that air about them of just, being this untouchable, don't speak to them unless you're spoken to type thing. And and the crew, are there to work for them. And they, it's, I don't know, just we've been lucky that we've never really had to deal with that kind of, fear that you're in the wrong place in someone's way. which you know it's been good for us to kind of learn, you know, by seeing what other bands are doing with their crew and how everything operates, and how bands travel as well.
And we'll be right back with Trenton Woodley of Hands Like Houses. But in the meantime, Trenton, where can we find you guys on the internet?
Pretty much everywhere. I mean, we're most kind of active on Instagram, but Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Twitter, or if you just go to handslikeHouses.net, it's got kind of central links to pretty much everything else. So jump on the website and then see where it leads.
So that brings me to 2013 when you guys signed up for the Warped Tour.
Oh, yeah.
The Vans Warped Tour. And I was looking at the year that you debuted on that tour. Mm-hmm. So you were touring that year with Real Big Fish, Motion City Soundtrack, the Amity Affliction, the Ataris. Like, these are huge names. Mm. Did you find that mentality continued into like these, you know, super, super big bands? Did you not have much to do with them on the tour?
To be honest, the thing about Warped Tour is you don't really have, like, there's so many people on the tour that you don't necessarily have to, you're never in anyone's way aside from everyone on your own stage. So I think it's kind of, and especially because you'd have different setups so you'd have the bands that are in buses. So there'd always be Bus World, which is where, you know, all the bus touring bands would be. Uh-huh. And then on the end of that, you'd have the Bandwagon World, which is, bandwagons are kind of like a fixed bed truck with essentially an RV set up in the back with a bunch of bunks, but they're kind of like secondary to the buses. And then you have all the vans and stuff that bands that aren't in one of the larger vehicles kind of, I guess, on the end of Bandwagon World. So, you know, you'd always kind of make friends with the bands you end up being kind of neighbours with, more or less, just because you'll see them day in and day out.
Okay, so it's not so much one big tour, one big group of people. It's lots of little tours that are sort of travelling together. Is that the kind of vibe? I
think so, yeah. There was a bit of, not really tribalism around stages, but you know what I mean? Like, everything was kind of centered by stage, and obviously the bigger stages had the bigger bands with the bigger buses.
Okay.
And, you know, there was the existing relationships between bands and crews, and yeah, I think it's just, you know, you would form your friends, you make friends. Everyone ate in the same catering area, you know, everyone kind of, before doors opened, everyone would just be crisscrossing back and forth between all the stands and stalls and stages and back and forth of the bus lot. So, I mean, you could bump into anyone you wanted to, and if you recognise people, there was nothing to really stop you from saying hey, but a lot of bands do tend to just hang out in their buses most of the day until the barbecues at the end of the night, where once the day's all done, everyone would just go and have a barbecue and chill out, and different bands would host, and it was a good social event.
Oh, excellent. That's, fantastic. So it's not all business and we've got a show to put on and, you know, running around and working. There's a lot of socialising and...
They call it the, you know, summer camp for rock stars, because it is kind of that, you know, it is as social as you want it to be. But there is that kind of freedom to, you know, be in your own space if you need it.
Do you get a lot of time off?
There's time off and there's time off. Like, you didn't really get a lot of time to just kind of explore or leave the festival grounds, unless there's a couple of shows that were like, you know, downtown-ish. You know, there's one just outside of Philly, for example. So I'd often go and wander into Philly when you're all done for the day. But, you know, you'd wake up in the morning, 8 or 9, depending on what crew you have. For us, starting off, you know, one big thing that was always kind of recommended to us is, you know, go and help the stage crew unload the truck and set up the stage for the day first thing in the morning, because, you know, it puts you in good stead with them.
Sure.
And you wouldn't find out what time you're playing until, like, you know, 9 or 10, sometimes later in the morning, as they get the schedule arranged, because it was kind of, you know, like just constantly on the fly. Which meant, because otherwise you just have people rocking up late in the day for the headliners. Like, you know, some bands would have certain things contracted that they play after X time, but
within that it was still pretty loosey-goosey.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, you might play anywhere from sometimes as early as 11:30 or 12 in the day, other times as late as 7 or 8 in the evening. So you'd kind of wake up, find out what your day is, you'd arrange all your press and stuff, and, you know, signings and interviews and stuff all around your stage time, and then you just see what blocks of time you had to kind of, you know, hang out and do your own thing.
Because that's a totally bananas, you know, lifestyle that's completely different to how I imagined it would be.
It's super intense, man. Like, it's just so much going on, and it's, you know, because it's touring, it's like you literally set up and pack up every single day. It's always the same people and in and out, and there's, you know, you make good friends with random people, and then you might not even speak to them again, but for that summer they're like, you know, your best of mates, and it's definitely a full-on experience.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Do you have any other ones lined up?
Warped is done, my friend.
Is it?
Yeah. This is the last year that they're doing, because they're doing like basically Van's sponsorship was for 25 years when they first signed up, and this is the 25th year.
Oh wow!
So because they closed up the tour because it was just it just wasn't economically viable to do anymore.
Yeah, I didn't know that was happening.
Yeah, man. So last year was like the last year, and it was apparently huge. So we kind of missed out by doing it in 17, not 18. We had. Because I had a bunch of throwback bands last year. But this year they're doing 3 dates. So they're doing one in California, one in, I think it's New York or somewhere, Long Island maybe.
Okay.
It's like, I don't know, basically one West Coast, one East Coast, and then they're doing a smaller one in Cleveland because Warped Tour is getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Okay, cool.
Like the tour itself is being kind of commemorated, so they're doing a date there to kind of celebrate that. So they've got a bunch of like, again, the kind of the throwback, like OG, iconic, like definitive Warped Tour bands, and that's all happening, in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, the lineup looks pretty mad, but that's it. So let's just kind of close out the Warped Tour sponsorship, so the Vans sponsorship, and then that's the end of it, and then we'll see, see what happens in future.
Will take its place.
I think Kevin Lyman just got, didn't want to do it anymore. And no one, like he spent a couple of years trying to find someone to kind of take up the reins, but just no one really had the appropriate knowledge, and the model itself wasn't necessarily viable anymore. So
yeah, okay. Yeah, I would have thought in this day and age where, big festivals are kind of becoming big again, it's
yeah. Not in America, man. Not in America.
Okay.
It's got to be like a destination type thing, I think. The way that like Australia's festivals have kind of, rather than being touring festivals, you've just got a whole bunch of one-off things. And America's kind of doing that a bit now. You got what's called the Wimmer festivals, which is what we just did a handful of, like, Welcome to Rockville and Epicenter, which used to be called Carolina Rebellion, and then, Rock on the Range, which is now Sonic Temple. A handful of like one-off festivals that have similar lineups, but they're all kind of promoted and organised as their own standalone thing. And I think that kind of, linking up those is kind of more beneficial than doing a single tour, touring festival, because just touring festival, essentially what happens is that the big days end up carrying the small days.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, so it's sort of like a touring lineup, but different events.
Yeah, and then obviously there's variations between those, especially once you get lower down the bill. The headliners are more or less the same, but... And it is all booked by the same central company, but just keeping them as distinct things means that they're not trying to promote nationally. They're able to kind of really focus their advertising and budgeting and stuff locally to to the few surrounding states for each one.
Oh wow, yeah, man, totally different world to my world of touring. That's for sure.
Definitely.
What is your dream tour vehicle?
Ooh, to be honest, I'm a big fan of the whole bandwagon setup. We haven't actually done like a full bus tour. We have done like a nightliner tour where we shared a bus with Bury Tomorrow in the UK and Europe, which was basically a 14-berth bus with like a back lounge, a little kind of sub kitchen sort of thing underneath, like double-decker bus, and that was pretty cool. But I think for me, the whole bandwagon setup's just, it's comfortable and consistent. You got a little kitchenette area, you got a lounge area, TV. Sound system. Yeah. You've got a little kind of desk, which usually ends up being the tour manager's desk for organising everything. And then 8 bunks in the back, sometimes 9. There are 1 or 2 of them with 9 bunks. And you have a shower in the back, which is probably the key thing. So you're not relying on like venue showers and everything. It's, you still got to fill up the water every couple of nights. But yeah, the shower and toilet in the back is very handy for long drives.
Yes, absolutely. Very good. Trenton, that brings us to the lightning round. Ooh. That's right. Every episode has a lightning round. I'm going to ask you 5 would you rather questions.
Uh-oh. Yeah. Let's swing it.
Here's the scenario. You're on tour. You're on a highway in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
Would you rather be a driver or a passenger?
Oh, man. I'm going to say passenger, because I tend to just sleep on those drives, or, read or watch something I've downloaded on Netflix because there's no signal.
Would you rather run out of fuel or get 3 flat tires?
Oof. Probably say fuel, because you're stuck either way, but it's easy to bring fuel back and refill.
Would you rather pay $4 a litre for that fuel or have to fill up every 100 kilometres?
Probably rather fuel up regularly just so you can kind of, stop, stretch your legs a bit more often and, grab something to eat or drink, although that'd get it old pretty quick. But, I'd probably rather have money at the end of it, because if you're spending all your money on long tours, it's like, cool, don't come home with anything. And like, what was the point of all that? Exposure.
Yeah. Speaking of exposure, would you rather have no windows or no heating and air conditioning?
Oh man, I hate having windows open. I don't know if it's just because as a kid, my dad would have his window open and my seat was always behind Dad, and I just hate getting blasted in the face with air. So I think that's just kind of put me off having the window open. And
finally, would you rather have the stereo stuck on a foreign language community radio station or an early mix of your first album?
Ooh. Probably say the early mix. I don't know, just so at least I'd get it, both would drive me nuts eventually, but I'd rather listen to something that I can kind of understand. Otherwise, I'd just be sitting there like, what?
Okay, fair enough. Well, Trenton, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure. And for everyone listening, please, if you like the show, subscribe and check us out on the interwebs. And tune in next time for Doris, you darling bus. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks for hanging out.
Hi there, me again. When I was a kid, I dreamed of being a bus driver when I grew up. Turns out I never really grew up, so driving this podcast is probably as close as I'll ever get to driving a bus. Anyway, if you enjoyed the show, do me a favour and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast or Spotify or whatever podcast directory is your favourite. That way you'll know the very second a new episode comes out. Thanks for listening. Oh, and if you're listening to this on a bus, don't forget to say thanks to the driver when you hop off.